Hi, I'm Tim. I'm an equities research analyst here at Revelata, and today I'll be presenting a quick overview of how to use Revelata's deepKPI dataset and Excel add-in to construct a detailed revenue model for a consumer retail company. In building a revenue model, we really want to get at the heart of how a business works and see what different factors are driving its performance. We want to be able to answer how these factors will change and how they will affect the business in future periods. Building a granular revenue build is the first step to doing this, as revenue is the most impactful metric of the business with the greatest amount of detail on how it's earned. Businesses often report revenues for different segments and products that they sell, and we can see the impact of each of these sections and capture trends over different periods with granular revenue models to project out a business's future cash flows. Getting to this level of resolution is what every fundamental analyst strives to do, and now with deepKPI's dataset and Excel add-in, you can do it in seconds instead of days. The example that I'm using today is CarMax, also known by its ticker KMX. But as you will see, this tool can pull key performance indicators from any publicly traded company. So with that, let's get started. So we want to start by using the deepKPI Excel add-in to actually pull the KPIs. So we're going to navigate over to the deepKPI tab in Excel, click Search deepKPI, and now that the tab is open, we can search the company that we're using. So we're doing CarMax today, so that's KMX. You can enter that in, and it'll load all the KPIs from CarMax in both text and table series. So for CarMax, we want to track their consolidated net sales, so let's search for their net sales. We want to track their average selling prices for each of their products. And we want to track their unit sales for their products. Now we can click Import to Excel to actually pull all the data. And as you can see, now deepKPI is entering in all the data automatically in a time series format. So now that deepKPI has executed the KPI pull, we can see that we're left with this output sheet full of our KPIs from CarMax. So as you can see, we're first given some consolidated financials from CarMax's income statement in the form of their net sales and operating revenues. We can see that they have used vehicle sales and then wholesale vehicle sales. And these wholesale vehicle sales for CarMax are just vehicles that are 10 years old or more. And then we have some other operating revenues. And then we have unit sales for used and wholesale vehicles, the actual number of vehicles that are being sold, and then we're given average selling prices of each vehicle. So in our future projection, we can just multiply our average selling prices by our unit sales with their projected values to get to our used and wholesale vehicle net sales. CarMax also has an auto financing segment where they get a lot of their revenue, but the accounting on that is very complicated. So to demonstrate deepKPI's functionality, we're only going to be looking at used and wholesale vehicle sales. Now I've arranged all of the KPIs from the raw data pull into this aggregator sheet so we can access them in our model. This is our foundational sheet that we will use to show our analysis of the KPIs using percent-based metrics and drivers. On the side, we have line items for each KPI from the KPI pull, and then period over period change and percent composition drivers that we will use for our projections. When we make a revenue model, we want to look at historical trends from recent periods and then base our assumptions off of those trends or current performance of the company to get our future values. So the first step in the process is to input all of the historical values for the KPIs. So to do that, we will navigate to our KPI values. And now we have historical data for our used and wholesale vehicle sales. And in the deepKPI format, it's in a time series, so it's very easy to input all the values at once in seconds. Now I'm just going to go ahead and do this for the rest of the historical values. Now that we have our historical values for all of our KPIs from the deepKPI data pool, we want to include some metrics and drivers in our model that actually indicate these historical trends. The two main ones that we will use today are going to be period over period change and percent composition. Period over period change is basically going to show us how much a value is growing or shrinking each year, and percent composition is going to show us what portion of a total value is being occupied by another value. So for example, we can look at how much of CarMax's total revenue is occupied by used vehicle sales or wholesale vehicle sales by looking at the percent that each one occupies. Let's start with period over period change. Since we have the KPIs together in a time series format, it makes it super easy to input all of these drivers. So in seconds, we've input these drivers that we can make assumptions off of to forecast the growth of used and wholesale vehicle sales. It's just as easy to calculate percent composition of these KPIs to see how our revenues are mixed. In this case, we can see how much of CarMax's total vehicle sales are occupied by used vehicles or wholesale vehicles. Now I'm going to go ahead and input the rest of the drivers for our KPIs. Now that we have our historical values, metrics, and drivers, we can start to make assumptions with these drivers to project out our future values of our KPIs. I'm going to start by making some assumptions about CarMax's period over period change for their used vehicles and wholesale vehicle sales. So based on our historical values, we can see that there's a downward trend in their sales from 23% growth to negative 13% growth, and they've recently come out of that downward trend and now they're growing again. So we can just forecast 3% sales for the next 5 years just to be conservative. And we can see similar behavior in their wholesale vehicle sales, but they've been flat for the last year, so we can just forecast that out. Now I'm going to do the same thing and input assumptions for the rest of our drivers. So now that we have assumption values for all of our drivers, we can use these assumptions to drive our future values of our KPIs. So since we're forecasting period over period change of used and wholesale vehicle sales, we can go to our previous value and then multiply it by 1 plus whatever our assumption driver is, and then we can use these values to forecast these future values. And with these two, this gives us our total vehicles sold by CarMax. And now that we have these future projected values, we can fill in the rest of these metrics to see how their product mix is going to change over time. Now I'm going to go ahead and forecast the rest of these future values based on these assumptions. Finally, now that we have future projected values for our unit level sales and their respective average selling prices, we can use this data to arrive at our consolidated revenues for CarMax. So firstly, we're going to find CarMax's total used vehicle net sales for future periods by firstly taking our value for our total used vehicle sales in the future, multiplying it by our average selling price per vehicle, and then dividing it by 1,000,000 to arrive at our final used vehicle net sales. We can carry this forward for the rest of the years and do the same for wholesale vehicle sales by taking our wholesale vehicle unit sales, multiplying it by our average selling price per wholesale vehicle, dividing that by 1,000,000, and carrying it forward. And we've already projected out our total other sales and revenues. So by adding all of these up, we can see that we get our final net sales and operating revenues for CarMax. And we can fill in the rest of these drivers to see how our consolidated net sales are behaving. And with that, we've completed our revenue build in under 5 minutes using Revelata's deepKPI Excel add-in.